I'm Joni Patry, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Well, today I want to make some predictions for the United States of America based on the astrological chart that I use. So this birth chart for the United States was actually rectified by Vedic astrologer James Kelleher. So most of us call this chart the Kelleher chart. So this chart is amazing because I find that whenever we have had major events in the United States, planets in this chart were triggered. So let's put this chart up and I'll explain better how and why this chart works. But most of all, let's look at making some serious predictions for the United States of America. So putting this chart up, we have the United States chart born July 4th, 1776 at 6:30 p.m. in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So this must have been the time that the Constitution was all signed and it became the birth of the United States. So with this chart, if you'll go to the ascendant sign, it is 8 degrees of Sagittarius. Now this 8-degree marking is monumental in terms of transiting planets. I have seen it triggered so many times, especially on September 11th of 2001, because that was when transiting Mars and K2 conjoined the ascendant. And if you'll look opposite the ascendant, we have 4 major planets in Gemini. Looking at the 7th house, we have Mars, Venus, Jupiter, and the Sun all in Gemini. Now remember that when September 11th occurred, we had both Jupiter and Rahu transiting in the sign of Gemini. So you see how this chart was majorly activated. And most people think, well, you know, Jupiter, the great benefic, it was crossing over these planets. Jupiter can sometimes magnify things. And this is exactly what happened on this day. It made this a huge, big event in terms of its opposition to the Mars K2. So it magnified that Mars K2. And one of the main reasons why I want you to see this chart is because I want you to better understand what is coming up here for this chart in the year of 2020. Now, I've been talking a lot about the eclipses and Rahu and Ketu coming together in the signs of Gemini and Sagittarius. Because so many times when they came together in these signs, there was some kind of tragedy that fell upon the world, but specifically the United States. Specifically the United States. So going back to September 11th, 2001, Rahu was in Gemini and Ketu was in Sag. And for the most part, most all of these events, Rahu was in the nakshatra of Ardra and Ketu was in the nakshatra of Mula, right there on the United States ascendant in Mula. So we have in this United States chart, we have both Venus and Jupiter are in the nakshatra of Ardra, which is the nakshatra that deals so much with tragedy. And Mula is the nakshatra that deals so much with destruction. So September 11, 2001, we had the eclipses occurring in Gemini and Sagittarius. Because the eclipses are always where Rahu and Ketu are. And remember, it takes 18 and a half years for the nodes to go through all 12 signs. So 18 and a half years prior to this time of September 11th was approximately the year of 1982. During that time, the AIDS virus came out, and so many people, and still to this day, are still dying from that epidemic. So that was the time, another time previous to 2001, that Rahu was in Gemini and Ketu in Sag. Next, go back 18 and a half years before that. That was the assassination of President Kennedy in 1963. Rahu was in Gemini and Ketu was in Sagittarius. And by the way, it was exactly President Kennedy had his Ketu right where Rahu conjoined it in his 10th house on the day of the assassination. So let me repeat that. President John F. Kennedy had his Ketu exactly where transiting Rahu conjoined it in Gemini, in his 10th house of his work and his career. So that was 1963, affected the United States of America, because look at all the planets that are there in Gemini. The sun, which represents the leader in a chart. And that was the destruction that occurred at that time for the United States chart. Furthermore, going back another 18 and a half years from 1963, we come to 1945. That was the bombing of Hiroshima, another event that tied in the United States of America. And we would have had Rahu in Gemini, crossing over all those planets, and Ketu in Sagittarius. So my point with pointing all that out is, guess what? Rahu is in Gemini now, and Ketu is in Sagittarius. Now, coming upon the months of February, the month of February and the month of March, this will be when Mars will conjoin Ketu in the sign of Sagittarius, exactly on the United States ascendant degree. And this time we have Jupiter conjoined it. Remember what I said, Jupiter can magnify things, make it bigger. Jupiter is intense and more powerful, though, in the sign of Sagittarius, rather than being in Gemini. So there could be a good transformational change that will change the world forever. Now, this will be intense based on this chart. Look at the facts that this mirrors very much the chart of September 11th, where Mars and Ketu will come together around 8 degrees of Sagittarius again. Jupiter will be there as well, but we have the eclipse that just occurred December of 2019, December 26th. We had a solar eclipse at 9-10 degrees of Sagittarius, right on the United States ascendant. This is major shifts and changes for the United States. And guess what's been happening? They have started an impeachment process of President Trump. I mean, this is another trigger with these planets on the United States chart. But that's not the half of it, because looking at where the transits are evolving to, we're going to see even more things that will surface and come up, for the United States this year of 2020. So really the whole starting point in January, there is a lunar eclipse that happens in January, early January, that will activate this 7th house. And remember, the 7th house of a chart can deal with opponents. It can deal with enemies. It can deal with those that oppose you. And this could be where there are some powerful opponents or enemies to the United States. This is why terrorism is most thought of when Rahu is in Gemini in this chart, but especially Mars, Ketu, and Sagittarius. They represent a burning desire of fanaticism, which deals with what? Terrorist. So in the month of February, when the moon crosses into the sign of Sagittarius, the moon usually activates things. As in September of 2001, September 11th, the moon came into Gemini during the time of the attack. It activated it. Now, around February 19th to the 23rd, we're going to have the moon transit in the sign of Sagittarius, which is a triggering device. But Mars is the biggest trigger. Think about Moon, Mars, Ketu, Jupiter, all aligned in Sagittarius. Plus, we've got, around the time of the eclipse in January, we have Mercury transiting here. So many planets are aligned, activating this chart. One thing I will mention, though, I find that many times you will find that presidents will have planets that align with this chart. And I must point out that President Trump happens to have his Mercury at 15 degrees of Gemini, right on the Jupiter in this chart. Another variable that he has in his chart is his natal Jupiter is at 14 degrees of Virgo. And this was actually right before the elections, transiting Jupiter conjoined his natal Jupiter and conjoined the United States Saturn. That was during the time of the elections. And so therefore, I must say that his Jupiter aligning with the Saturn in the United States chart has deep relevance to the changes and transformations that he will bring in the process of his being the president. It could deal with the major chaos that is happening through him being president. So something big is happening here. This is unheard of. And I want you to know that during the time of the next elections in 2020, November of 2020, I'm looking at the fact that transiting Mars will be in Pisces about the second week of November. It will station going direct from being retrograde. And when Mars stations, when any planet stations, either retrograde or direct, it empowers that planet for whatever it is about. And Mars is all about violence. It's about things surfacing of an emotional nature. It will be in Pisces, which is very important because being in Pisces, Pisces is the sign that deals with major events for the United States because it's in the fourth house of the land, the homeland. And Mars being in Pisces stationing means there's going to be riots, there's going to be upheaval, there's going to be revolutions. People are going to be protesting around the month of November based on this chart because Mars will actually, in the process of stationing in Pisces, will be aspecting all those planets in Gemini by its forward square, and it will be opposed Saturn by opposition in the 10th house. It looks like there is going to be major riots around this time of the elections based on this chart. And it could deal with civil war. It could deal with upheaval, riots, protests that are so destructive. To what? The leadership and who is being put in power. Here's the thing. The sun, which represents the president, is 22 degrees of Gemini, and Mars, where it's going to be stationing, is going to be almost exactly squaring that sun, which represents the leader. And as it opposes that Saturn as well, Saturn is in the 10th house of this chart. And Mars is, when it opposes Saturn, it's always about setbacks, delays, and changes, and many things are going to change. Not to mention also that Mercury on the day of elections will turn direct as well. That means that we will not know, nor will the people be happy with what's happening with the government, or at least there's going to be a portion of the people that rebel, big time. So the United States chart is coming under pressure. But going back to February, where we have the huge breakdown of something very violent, February of around the 19th to the 23rd, based on this chart. After that, Mars will conjoin with Saturn in the second house of this chart. What is the second house? Money, finances, everything to do with the financial system in the country. So by the time that Mars comes together with Saturn, which will be March, the end of March through April, Mars will be exalted in Capricorn, conjunct Saturn in Capricorn in its own sign. Very, very intense. There will be some radical shifts in the government and in what? The financial part of the government. There will be some major shifts in the economy then. So watch how when Mars and Saturn come together close to K2 in the second house, major shifts in the economy. The stock market will probably fall during those months. Will it stay down? I doubt it. But it will be intense, probably due to the event that happened in February. So looking at that, moving forward, we are going to have Mars coming into Aquarius later on. And while it's in Aquarius, Mars in Aquarius, when it crosses over, and this will be pretty much April, May, and possibly into June, that Mars is turning things up in the economy. But also, you'll see that a lot of things will surface that were corrupt, because as Mars crosses over the moon in the third house of communications, truth and information will unveil. Lots of things we didn't know about. We think we've seen it all. A lot is here. And This is the indicator of something to do with corruption, not only with money, but probably with drugs and the sex trafficking that's been going on. Did you know that the United States is one of the leaders in this terrible, terrible dark side of this country? And much is going to change in accordance to this. Now, by the time Mars reaches Pisces, this will be approximately, there's going to be trouble in the homeland. A lot of things are going to shift. And here's another thing that's about to shift in the months of September, when Rahu in K2 shifts signs. Rahu will go into Taurus and Ketu will go into Scorpio. And this goes into the 6th and the 12th house of this chart, dealing with enemies, dealing with the prospect of war and fighting. This is things are unseen that are coming out of the woodwork that we cannot see by the fact that Ketu is going to be in Scorpio in the 12th house of this chart. And this is part of the revolutionary change that is due to happen because, let me point out something else very, very important dealing with this chart. Saturn is going to be coming together with Jupiter and Pluto in this year of 2020, and they will be transiting in the 2nd house. It deals with finances, major shifts and changes in the stock market. And as you see things teetering up and down with this impeachment, you're going to see the stock market go up and down because it will follow in sync with the progress in what's happening with this impeachment process. So first, when Mars and Saturn go together in the 2nd house, major shifts. But Jupiter and Saturn will come together in Capricorn. The last time that they were together in Capricorn was 1960 and 1961, particularly that Saturn. 1961 is the time Saturn and Mars came together. Saturn and Jupiter came together, in Sagittarius in 1960, but in 1961, Saturn and Jupiter came together in Capricorn. Actually, in that year was a very, very good year economically for the world, and especially for the United States. So that Jupiter-Saturn together brought up the economy. So it's not going to completely crash. But with Pluto being with Saturn, there's going to be the breakdown of the government. And as this breaks down, so will the economy. It's going to change. I don't think it's going to be a total crash. It's just going to be extraordinarily volatile. Whereas we think it's a crash, it will rise again. Why? Because Jupiter is there with Rahu in the 2nd house in this year of 2020. Jupiter will be going in the summer months with Pluto in the 2nd house of this chart, activating what? Finances, money. It'll be on a roller coaster ride this whole year. And by the time we have Rahu and Jupiter, though, shift into Taurus and Scorpio by September, and for a year and a half following, that's when we're going to have a plunge in the stock market that may not recover quite as quickly. Okay, so that's basing this all on this chart for the United States of America. There is so much to be seen in this chart. And there could be another thing that we might want to look at, the dashas. Now, many people, there's differences of opinion. Some people think you can use the dashas of this chart. Some people say you cannot. But let's just say, if we did, the United States is in Rahu Jupiter currently. It started in June, of 2018, Rahu Jupiter. And if you'll look, Jupiter being in the 7th house, Rahu being in the 8th house, it's about money. It's about a rise. And throughout the year of 2018 and 2019, the stock market was on a rise. It was high. But let me just say this. Pretty much around election day, the Dasha Bhukti will change for the United States of America. And I'm looking at November 2nd, November 2nd, November 3rd of 2020. the United States will go into Rahu Saturn. Rahu Saturn. Notice that Saturn is in the 10th house. It's going to be a remarkable shift and a remarkable change for the United States in leadership. It's all about to transpire and change with Saturn. And it will be more conservative. It will be more, it's going to be radical. And if you count from Rahu to Saturn, using the Mahadasha as the ascendant, Saturn goes 3 placements, counting from Rahu. That can indicate major uncovering of the communication and the media in the government. Everything will shift, everything will change. And this is going to be a new era financially, a major, major shift with the new presidential election and the new president that takes when this all comes about. After what? Inauguration. I want you to think back around the last time that Jupiter and Saturn were together in Capricorn, 1961. And that was the inauguration of President Kennedy. So we are going to have the inauguration in this coming year after 2020, 2021, there will be an inauguration of the president. And there will be some transformations that are very, very much like the 60s because of this activation of Jupiter and Saturn together. After all these years, they come back together in the sign of Capricorn where they were in 1961, in the year of 2000 and 2001. No, I'm sorry, the year of 2020 and 2021. So get ready. This is the time of change. Watch this chart. Watch how things unravel as the planets in Gemini are activated by the eclipses and the transits, particularly Mars, as it transits in the sign of Sagittarius. And one last note, in June of 2020, we're going to have another solar eclipse on the 21st of June, and that will be around 6 degrees of Gemini. So it's also activating this chart in terms of powerful enemies that have to be watched, that the homeland must be protected. And with all the political riots, things going on within this country, there is not enough attention put on protecting the country from the enemies because the focus is in the wrong places, making the United States much more vulnerable. So please watch this chart, see how things unravel to better understand what's happening in the future and astrology. So with that, I'd like to close. If you would like more information on me, or you would like to sign up for my free monthly newsletter or a consultation, go to my website, which is galacticcenter.org. Or if you would like to sign up for my university to learn Vedic astrology, go to my university website to better understand how you can learn Vedic astrology online with me. Go to University of Vedic Astrology.com. Thank you.